From the floating cradle in the Nile to the mountaintop where he gazed upon the promised land he would never enter, Moses lived one of history's most extraordinary lives. Born under a death sentence, raised in the enemy's palace, transformed from prince to fugitive to prophet, his story defies imagination. This is the man who spoke face to face with God in a burning bush that wouldn't consume, who turned a river into blood with a wooden staff, who split an entire sea in half while an army thundered behind him. He climbed mountains shrouded in fire and smoke to receive laws written by the finger of God himself. But Moses was no superhero. He was a stuttering shepherd who argued with God, a leader who sometimes doubted, a liberator who never reached liberation's goal. His journey transformed millions of slaves into a nation, yet his greatest battles weren't against Pharaoh's chariots, but against the stubbornness of his own people and the weight of an impossible calling. This is the complete story of Moses, the reluctant hero who changed the world forever. The descendants of Jacob had been living in Egypt for generations. What started as a small family of 70 people had grown into something much bigger. The book of Exodus, chapter 1, verse 7, tells us that the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. But there was a problem. A new king rose to power in Egypt, and this Pharaoh didn't remember Joseph or all the good things he had done for Egypt long ago. When he looked at the Israelites, he didn't see people, he saw a threat. In verses 9 and 10, Pharaoh said to his people, "Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land." So Pharaoh made a cruel decision. He forced the Israelites into slavery. Verse 11 says, "Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses." The Egyptians made their lives bitter with hard work in brick and mortar and with all kinds of service in the fields. Every task was done with harshness. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread. This made the Egyptians dread the children of Israel even more. Verse 14 describes how they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service, in which they made them serve, was with rigor. When slavery didn't stop the Hebrew population from growing, Pharaoh took even darker steps. He called for the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah. In verse 16 he commanded them, "When you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live." But these midwives feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. Verse 17 says, "But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive." When Pharaoh questioned them about this, they told him that Hebrew women were strong and gave birth quickly, before the midwives could even arrive. God blessed these courageous women for their faith. The people continued to multiply and grow mighty, so Pharaoh issued a new command, this time to all his people. Verse 22 records his horrifying decree. "So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, Every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive." The Nile River, which had always given life to Egypt, was now to become a grave for Hebrew baby boys. It was into this dark and desperate time that our story's main character was born. In chapter 2, verse 1, we read, "And a man of the house of Levi went and took as wife a daughter of Levi." This Levite couple would become the parents of one of history's most important figures, though they didn't know it yet. Verse 2 continues, "So the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months." This mother's name was Jochebed, and her act of hiding her baby was an act of both love and defiance. Every day she kept him hidden was a risk. Every cry he made could have given him away. For 3 months she managed to keep her son safe from Pharaoh's murderous decree. But babies grow. They get louder. They become harder to hide. Jochebed knew she couldn't keep this up forever. She had to make an impossible choice, and what she did next showed both wisdom and faith. Verse 3 tells us, "But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. She wove together a small basket from papyrus reeds that grew along the Nile. She carefully waterproofed it with tar and pitch, making it float like a tiny boat. Then she placed her precious baby inside." Notice what she did. She technically obeyed Pharaoh's command. The baby was placed in the river, but she didn't throw him in to drown. She gave him a chance. She placed the basket carefully among the reeds at the river's edge, not in the current that would sweep him away, and she didn't leave everything to chance. Verse 4 says, "And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him." The baby's older sister, Miriam, was stationed nearby to watch. Jochebed had a plan, though we don't know all the details. Perhaps she knew the patterns of the Egyptian royals. Perhaps she had heard that Pharaoh's daughter bathed in that part of the river. Or perhaps she simply trusted God with the outcome. What we do know is that this mother made a basket that would float, placed it where it might be found by the right person, and set a watchful sister to see what would happen. It was an act of desperate hope. The timing of what happened next was remarkable. Verse 5 records, "Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it." Here was the daughter of the very Pharaoh who had ordered all Hebrew boys to be killed. She had come to the Nile with her attendants, probably as part of her daily routine. But this day would be different from all the others. Verse 6 continues, "And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, 'This is one of the Hebrews' children.'" The princess wasn't fooled. She knew immediately this was a Hebrew baby, one of the very children her father had condemned to death. The baby's crying moved her heart. Despite her father's decree, despite the political tensions, despite everything that should have made her walk away, she felt compassion. This was the moment Miriam had been waiting for. Verse 7 says, "Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, 'Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?'" What clever timing. The princess had just found a baby. She clearly wanted to keep him, but he needed to be fed, and an Egyptian princess probably didn't nurse children herself. Pharaoh's daughter agreed. Verse 8 simply states, "And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Go.' So the maiden went and called the child's mother." Can you imagine Jochebed's emotions? Her baby, who she thought she might never see again, was being brought back to her, and she would actually be paid to care for her own son. Verse 9 records what the princess told her. "Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages.' So the woman took the child and nursed him." Jochebed got to keep her baby safe in her own home, at least for a few more years, while he was young enough to need nursing. And the protection over him now came from the highest level, the royal family itself. But this arrangement wouldn't last forever. Verse 10 tells us, "And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son." When the boy was old enough to be weaned, probably around 3 years old, Jochebed had to give him up again. This time it was permanent. He would live in the palace now, raised as Egyptian royalty. The princess gave him his name. The end of verse 10 says, "So she called his name Moses, saying, 'Because I drew him out of the water.'" The name Moses sounds like the Hebrew word for draw out. Every time someone spoke his name, they would remember where he came from, pulled from the Nile, saved from death, given a completely new life. Years passed. The baby who floated in a basket grew into a man in a palace. The book of Acts, chapter 7, verse 22, gives us a glimpse of Moses' education. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and deeds. He received the finest education Egypt could offer. He knew their literature, their mathematics, their architecture, their military strategies. He walked the halls of power and privilege, but Moses never forgot who he really was. Somehow, whether through those early years with his mother or through later contact with his people, he knew he was a Hebrew. He knew those slaves laboring under the Egyptian sun were his true family. Exodus chapter 2, verse 11 begins a pivotal moment. Now it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. He deliberately went to see how his people were living. This wasn't a casual stroll. Moses wanted to witness their suffering firsthand. What he saw that day changed everything. The verse continues, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. Here was the reality of Hebrew life under Pharaoh, brutal beatings at the hands of Egyptian taskmasters. And Moses, despite all his Egyptian upbringing, despite all his royal privileges, saw this Hebrew as his brother. Verse 12 tells us what he did next. So he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Moses made sure no witnesses were watching. Then he acted decisively and violently. He killed the Egyptian who was beating the Hebrew slave, and he buried the body in the sand, probably thinking the matter was settled in secret. Moses likely thought he was striking a blow for justice. Perhaps he even imagined himself as a deliverer for his people. But he had just committed murder, and even buried secrets have a way of being uncovered. Moses probably thought his secret was safe, but the very next day proved him wrong. Verse 13 says, "And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. And he said to the one who did the wrong, 'Why are you striking your companion?'" Moses tried to break up a fight between 2 of his own people. He questioned the aggressor, probably expecting gratitude or at least respect after what he had done the day before. But the response he got shocked him. Verse 14 records the man's bitter reply. Then he said, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" The secret was out. People knew what Moses had done, and instead of seeing him as a hero, this Hebrew challenged his authority and threw his crime back in his face. The verse continues, "So Moses feared and said, 'Surely this thing is known.'" Fear gripped Moses. If the Hebrews knew, how long before Pharaoh found out? How could he have been so careless? His attempt to help his people had backfired completely. Moses' fears were justified. Verse 15 tells us, when Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. There would be no mercy, no consideration for the fact that Moses had been raised as part of the royal family. He had killed an Egyptian, and the penalty was death. Moses had only one option. The verse continues, "But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian." He ran for his life, leaving behind everything he had ever known: the palace, the power, the comfort, the education. He went from prince to fugitive in a single day. He traveled east into the wilderness until he reached Midian. This was a land far from Egypt's borders, inhabited by nomadic people. Moses arrived there exhausted, alone, and uncertain of his future. The verse ends simply, "And he sat down by a well." He had nowhere to go and no plan. He just sat there, a refugee in a foreign land. Moses sat by that well, probably reflecting on how drastically his life had changed. But even in this low moment, providence was at work. Verse 16 tells us, "Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. These young women came to the well to do their daily work of watering their sheep." It was routine for them, but not every day went smoothly. Verse 17 says, "Then the shepherds came and drove them away." Other shepherds, probably men who thought they had priority at the well, pushed these women aside and tried to take over, but Moses still had some fight left in him. The verse continues, "But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock." Here was something he could do. He couldn't go back to Egypt. He couldn't undo his crime, but he could stand up for people being treated unfairly. Some things about Moses' character hadn't changed, even if everything else had. The women went home, and their father noticed they were back earlier than usual. Verse 18 records, "When they came to Reuel their father, he said, 'How is it that you have come so soon today?'" No, something was different, and he wanted to know what had happened. His daughters explained. Verse 19 says, "And they said, 'An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock.'" They assumed Moses was Egyptian based on his appearance, his clothing, or perhaps his accent. They told their father how this stranger had defended them and even finished their work for them. Their father's response showed the hospitality of that culture. Verse 20 records his words. "So he said to his daughters, 'And where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread.'" He was shocked they had left their helper behind. They needed to bring this man home and feed him properly. What started as a meal turned into something more permanent. Verse 21 tells us, "Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter to Moses." Moses agreed to stay with this family. Their father, also called Jethro, gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses as his wife. The fugitive prince became a shepherd and a son-in-law. Verse 22 adds one more detail, "And she bore him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, 'I have been a stranger in a foreign land.'" Moses named his first son Gershom, which means stranger there. Even as he built a new life, Moses remembered he was far from home. He was an exile living in a land not his own. 40 years passed this way. Moses tended sheep in the Midian wilderness. The prince who once walked palace halls now walked desert paths. The man, educated in all Egypt's wisdom, now spent his days with animals. It seemed like his story was over before it really began, but God was preparing him. Those 40 years in the desert would teach Moses things no Egyptian school could have taught him. He learned patience. He learned the wilderness. He learned to lead stubborn sheep through difficult terrain. And he was about to learn that God hadn't forgotten him or his people. Moses was doing what he had done countless times before, watching his father-in-law's sheep. Chapter 3, verse 1 says, "Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God." This was an ordinary day doing ordinary work. Moses had probably stopped thinking about Egypt, about his people, about being anything more than a shepherd. He led the flock to an area near Horeb, which would later be known as Mount Sinai. He had no idea this mountain would become one of the most important places in his story. Then something caught his eye. Verse 2 tells us, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed." Fire in the desert wasn't unusual, but this fire was different. The bush burned and burned, yet it wasn't turning to ash. It just kept burning, never consumed. This was impossible, and Moses knew it. Verse 3 records his reaction. "Then Moses said, 'I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn.'" Curiosity drew him closer. He had to understand what he was seeing. He stepped toward this strange sight, probably expecting some natural explanation. But as he approached, something extraordinary happened. Verse 4 says, "So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, 'Moses, Moses.' And he said, 'Here I am.' God spoke his name twice. After 40 years of silence, after decades of being a nobody in the middle of nowhere, God called him by name. Moses responded simply, 'Here I am.' He didn't run. He didn't doubt he was hearing a voice. He just answered. Then came the warning. Verse 5 records God's words, "Do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground." Moses had stumbled onto sacred space. The ground itself was holy because God was present there. Removing sandals was a sign of reverence, an acknowledgement that he was standing before something, someone far greater than himself. Verse 6 continues, "Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. This wasn't just any divine being. This was the God of his ancestors, the God of the promises made generations ago. Moses covered his face in fear and reverence. He knew he was in the presence of the Holy One. God didn't waste time with small talk. He got straight to the point. Verse 7 says, "And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows." God had seen everything. The beatings, the harsh labor, the tears, the prayers, none of it had escaped his notice. He knew exactly what his people were suffering. Verse 8 continues with God's plan. "So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land, to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites." God wasn't just going to ease their suffering. He was going to completely deliver them and give them their own land. A good land, a spacious land, a land with plenty of food and resources. This was the promise made to Abraham, coming to fulfillment. Then came the part that changed everything for Moses. Verse 10 records God's words, "Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." Moses wasn't just being told about this plan. He was being recruited to carry it out. After 40 years of being a shepherd, God was calling him to confront the most powerful ruler on earth and demand the release of an entire nation of slaves. Moses' response showed he was far from confident. Verse 11 says, "But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" This was the opposite of the younger Moses, who had killed an Egyptian and tried to be a deliverer on his own terms. Now he questioned his own adequacy. He was nobody special anymore, just an old shepherd. How could he possibly do what God was asking? God's answer focused not on Moses' ability, but on his presence. Verse 12 records, "So he said, I will certainly be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." God promised to be with him. That was what mattered. And the sign would come later, when Moses brought the people back to this very mountain to worship God. But Moses wasn't satisfied yet. He raised another objection in verse 13. "Then Moses said to God, Indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, What is his name? What shall I say to them?" Moses wanted credentials. The people would want to know which God had sent him. Names mattered. Different gods had different names and different powers. So Moses asked for God's name. What happened next was one of the most important moments in biblical history. Verse 14 records God's answer, "And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you." God identified himself as I am, the self-existent one, the eternal one, the one who simply is. He wasn't one God among many. He was the God above all, the source of all existence. Then verse 15 adds, "Moreover, God said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, The Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations." God gave Moses detailed instructions about what to tell the elders of Israel, how they would listen, and how they would go together to Pharaoh. But God also warned that Pharaoh wouldn't let them go easily. He would need to be forced through God's mighty acts. Still, Moses resisted. In chapter 4, verse 1, he raised yet another objection. Then Moses answered and said, "But suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say the Lord has not appeared to you." So God gave him signs. He turned Moses' staff into a snake and back again. He made Moses' hand leprous and then healed it instantly. He promised that if these signs weren't enough, Moses could turn Nile water into blood. These miracles would prove God had truly sent him, but Moses still wasn't convinced. Verse 10 records his next excuse. Then Moses said to the Lord, "O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." Moses claimed he couldn't speak well. Perhaps he had a stutter or some other speech difficulty. Perhaps he just felt inadequate for public speaking. Either way, he thought this disqualified him. God's response in verses 11 and 12 was direct. So the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth? Or who makes the mute, the deaf, the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall say." God reminded Moses who was in control here. The same God who made mouths could certainly help Moses speak. He would tell Moses exactly what to say. But Moses had one more objection. Verse 13 shows his desperation. But he said, "O my Lord, please send by the hand of whomever else you may send." Moses basically said, "Please send someone else." Anyone else. After all God's promises and signs and reassurances, Moses still wanted out of this assignment. Verse 14 tells us God's patience was wearing thin, so the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. But even in his anger, God provided a solution. He told Moses that his brother Aaron was already on his way and would be his spokesman. Aaron would speak to the people while Moses spoke to Aaron. And Moses was to take that staff in his hand, the one that had become a snake, because he would use it to perform the miraculous signs. Moses finally ran out of objections. He returned to Jethro and asked permission to go back to Egypt. God had called him, equipped him, and given him a partner. The shepherd was about to become something far greater. Moses gathered his wife and sons and prepared for the journey back to Egypt. Chapter 4, verse 20 tells us, "Then Moses took his wife and his sons and set them on a donkey, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. He carried that staff because God had told him he would perform signs with it." Before Moses left, God gave him a clear picture of what lay ahead. Verse 21 says, "And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do all those wonders before Pharaoh which I have put in your hand. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go." God warned Moses that despite all the miracles, Pharaoh would resist. God also gave Moses a message to deliver. Verses 22 and 23 record his words. "Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I say to you, let my son go that he may serve me. But if you refuse to let him go, indeed I will kill your son, your firstborn." This was both a claim and a warning. Meanwhile, God was also speaking to Aaron back in Egypt. Verse 27 says, "And the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses." So he went and met him on the mountain of God and kissed him. The two brothers reunited at the same mountain where God had appeared to Moses in the burning bush. They hadn't seen each other in 40 years. Verse 28 tells us what happened next. "So Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord who had sent him, and all the signs which he had commanded him. Moses explained everything. Aaron listened and believed. Together they traveled to Egypt and gathered the Hebrew elders." Verse 29 says, "Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel. Aaron did the speaking, just as God had arranged." Verse 30 records, "And Aaron spoke all the words which the Lord had spoken to Moses. Then he did the signs in the sight of the people. The response was immediate and powerful." Verse 31 says, "So the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked on their affliction, then they bowed their heads and worshipped." After generations of suffering, God had finally come to rescue them. With the elders convinced, Moses and Aaron were ready for the real challenge. Chapter 5, verse 1 records their first encounter with Egypt's king. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." They weren't asking for permanent freedom yet, just permission for a religious festival. But even this simple request met with contempt. Verse 2 gives us Pharaoh's response. And Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." Pharaoh didn't recognize the God of Israel. He flat out refused. Moses and Aaron tried again. Verse 3 says, "So they said, 'The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please, let us go 3 days' journey into the desert and sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword.'" They warned that refusing could bring disaster. But Pharaoh wasn't interested. His response was harsh. Verse 4 records, "Then the king of Egypt said to them, 'Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people from their work? Get back to your labor.'" Pharaoh accused them of distracting the workers. Verse 5 adds, "And Pharaoh said, 'Look, the people of the land are many now, and you make them rest from their labor.'" So Pharaoh made things worse. Verse 6 tells us, "So the same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, 'You shall no longer give the people straw to make brick as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves.'" The Israelites had been making bricks using straw provided by their Egyptian masters. Now they would have to find their own straw while still producing the same number of bricks. Verse 8 continues, "And you shall lay on them the quota of bricks which they made before. You shall not reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry out, saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God.'" Pharaoh thought the slaves had too much free time. Verse 9 says, "Let more work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it, and let them not regard false words." The result was predictable. Verse 13 says, "And the taskmasters forced them to hurry, saying, 'Fulfill your work, your daily quota, as when there was straw.' When the quotas weren't met, the Hebrew foremen were beaten. These foremen complained to Pharaoh, but he just repeated that the Hebrews were lazy. The Hebrew foremen left Pharaoh's presence and ran into Moses and Aaron. They were angry. Verse 21 says, "And they said to them, 'Let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us.'" Instead of helping, Moses and Aaron had made everything worse. Moses was devastated. He turned to God in verse 22. "So Moses returned to the Lord and said, 'Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it you have sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people. Neither have you delivered your people at all.'" But God's answer in chapter 6 showed that everything was going according to plan. Verse 1 records, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will let them go, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land.'" God sent Moses back to Pharaoh with a clear message. Chapter 7, verse 16 records what Moses was to say. "And you shall say to him, 'The Lord God of the Hebrews has sent me to you, saying, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But indeed until now you would not hear.'" And Pharaoh had been given his chance. Verse 17 continues, "Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will strike the waters which are in the river with the rod that is in my hand, and they shall be turned to blood." The Nile River was about to become undrinkable. Moses and Aaron went to meet Pharaoh at the river's edge. Verse 20 says, "And Moses and Aaron did so, just as the Lord commanded. So he lifted up the rod and struck the waters that were in the river, in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants. And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood." Verse 21 describes the result. "The fish that were in the river died. The river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink the water of the river. So there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh wasn't impressed. Verse 22 tells us, "Then the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments. And Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them as the Lord had said. 7 days passed with the Nile contaminated. Then God told Moses to go back to Pharaoh." Chapter 8, verse 1 records the message, "And the Lord spoke to Moses. Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all your territory with frogs.'" Verse 6 says, "So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt." Frogs were everywhere. Again, the magicians duplicated the plague. Verse 7 tells us, "And the magicians did so with their enchantments, and brought up frogs on the land of Egypt." This time, Pharaoh cracked a little. Verse 8 says, "Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, 'Entreat the Lord that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go, that they may sacrifice to the Lord.'" Moses let Pharaoh choose when the frogs would be removed. Verse 13 tells us, "So the Lord did according to the word of Moses. And the frogs died out of the houses, out of the courtyards, and out of the fields. But as soon as Pharaoh got relief, he changed his mind." Verse 15 says, "But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and did not heed them as the Lord had said. So God sent the third plague without warning." Verse 16 records, "So the Lord said to Moses, 'Say to Aaron, stretch out your rod and strike the dust of the land, so that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt.'" Verse 17 says, "And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and struck the dust of the earth, and it became lice on man and beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt." This time, something different happened. Verse 18 tells us, "Now the magicians so worked with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice on man and beast. The magicians failed." They had to admit in verse 19, "Then the magicians said to Pharaoh, 'This is the finger of God.' But Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had said. The plagues continued with increasing severity." Chapter 8, verse 20 records the warning. "And the Lord said to Moses, 'Rise early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh as he comes out to the water. Then say to him, "Thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. Or else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you and your servants, on your people and into your houses." But God made a distinction this time. Verse 22 says, "And in that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, in order that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the land." The Hebrews in Goshen would be protected. Verse 24 tells us, "And the Lord did so. Thick swarms of flies came into the house of Pharaoh, into his servants' houses, and into all the land of Egypt." The land was corrupted because of the swarms of flies. Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and tried to compromise, but Moses refused. The flies left, but verse 32 tells us, "But Pharaoh hardened his heart at this time also. Neither would he let the people go." The fifth plague struck the livestock. Chapter 9, verse 3 records God's warning, "Behold, the hand of the Lord will be on your cattle in the field, on the horses, on the donkeys, on the camels, on the oxen, and on the sheep." A very severe pestilence. God again made a distinction. Verse 4 says, "And the Lord will make a difference between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt. So nothing shall die of all that belongs to the children of Israel." The next day it happened. Verse 6 tells us, "So the Lord did this thing on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died. But of the livestock of the children of Israel, not one died." But verse 7 says, "But the heart of Pharaoh became hard, and he did not let the people go." Without warning, God sent the sixth plague. Verse 8 says, "So the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Take for yourselves handfuls of ashes from a furnace, and let Moses scatter it toward the heavens in the sight of Pharaoh." Verse 10 records, "Then they took ashes from the furnace and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses scattered them toward heaven. And they caused boils that break out in sores on man and beast." Verse 11 adds, "And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils. For the boils were on the magicians and on all the Egyptians." But verse 12 says, "But the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses. The seventh plague brought hail." Verse 18 records the warning, "Behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause very heavy hail to rain down, such as has not been in Egypt since its founding until now." God even gave advance warning for people to protect themselves. Verse 23 says, "And Moses stretched out his rod toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire darted to the ground. And the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt." Verse 24 describes it, "So there was hail, and fire mingled with the hail, so very heavy that there was none like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation." Pharaoh seemed genuinely repentant. Verse 27 says, "And Pharaoh sent and called for Moses and Aaron, and said to them, I have sinned this time. The Lord is righteous, and my people and I are wicked." Moses prayed, and the hail stopped. But verse 34 confirms, "And when Pharaoh saw that the rain, the hail, and the thunder had ceased, he sinned yet again, and he hardened his heart, he and his servants. God sent Moses to Pharaoh again." Chapter 10, verse 3 records, "So Moses and Aaron came into Pharaoh and said to him, Thus says the Lord God of the Hebrews, How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me." The warning came next. Verse 4 says, "Or else if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory." Even Pharaoh's own servants had had enough. Verse 7 records their plea. "Then Pharaoh's servants said to him, How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet know that Egypt is destroyed?" Pharaoh tried another compromise, but Moses refused, so the locusts came. Verse 13 says, "So Moses stretched out his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts." Verse 15 tells us, "For they covered the face of the whole earth, so that the land was darkened. And they ate every herb of the land, and all the fruit of the trees, which the hail had left. So there remained nothing green on the trees or on the plants of the field throughout all the land of Egypt." Pharaoh rushed to call Moses. Verse 16 says, "Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron in haste, and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you." Moses prayed, and verse 19 says, "And the Lord turned a very strong west wind, which took the locusts away and blew them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in all the territory of Egypt." But verse 20 says, "But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go. Then came the ninth plague, darkness." God told Moses in verse 21, "Then the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, darkness which may even be felt." Verse 22 records, "So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. For 3 full days Egyptians couldn't see anything." Verse 23 says, "They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings." Pharaoh called Moses again with yet another compromise. Verse 24 tells us, "Then Pharaoh called to Moses and said, Go serve the Lord. Only let your flocks and your herds be kept back. Let your little ones also go with you." Moses refused. Verse 26 continues, "Our livestock also shall go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind." This was the final straw. Verse 28 records his threat. "Then Pharaoh said to him, Get away from me. Take heed to yourself and see my face no more. For in the day you see my face you shall die." Moses agreed. Verse 29 gives his response. "So Moses said, You have spoken well. I will never see your face again." But before Moses left, God gave him one final message. Chapter 11, verse 4 records, "Then Moses said, 'Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the female servant who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the animals.'" Verse 8 ends, "And he went out from Pharaoh in great anger." God gave Moses detailed instructions for the Israelites. Chapter 12, verse 3 says, "Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, 'On the 10th of this month every man shall take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household.' Each family was to select a lamb, a male without defect. 1 year old, they were to keep the lamb until the 14th day. Verse 6 tells us, "Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight." Then came the crucial instruction. Verse 7 says, "And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it." The blood had to be applied to the doorframe of each house. They were to roast the lamb and eat it that night with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Verse 11 adds urgency. "And thus you shall eat it, with a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. So you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover." God explained what would happen that night. Verse 12 records his words. "For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord." Verse 13 gives the promise of protection. "Now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt." The people listened and obeyed. Verse 28 says, "Then the children of Israel went away and did so. Just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. Every family selected a lamb, marked their doorposts with blood, and prepared for the night ahead. Midnight came. Verse 29 records what happened. "And it came to pass at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock." Verse 30 describes the aftermath. "So Pharaoh rose in the night, he, all his servants, and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead." The sound of weeping filled Egypt. Pharaoh's resistance finally broke. Verse 31 says, "Then he called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, 'Rise, go out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as you have said.' He told them to leave immediately." Verse 32 continues, "Also take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also." The Egyptians urged the Hebrews to leave quickly. Verse 33 tells us, "And the Egyptians urged the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, 'We shall all be dead.'" The exodus had begun. Verse 37 gives us the numbers. "Then the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children." 600,000 men, plus women and children, meant roughly 2 million people were leaving Egypt. God didn't lead them on the most direct route to Canaan. Chapter 13, verse 17, explains why. "Then it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, 'Lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt.'" The shortest path would have meant immediate warfare, and the people weren't ready for that. Instead, verse 18 says, "So God led the people around by way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt." Moses made sure to take something important. Verse 19 records, "And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you." God provided visible guidance. Verse 21 tells us, "And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night." They had divine GPS, a cloud during the day and fire at night. Back in Egypt, Pharaoh was having second thoughts. Chapter 14, verse 5 says, "Now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" He regretted letting his slave workforce leave. Pharaoh mobilized his army. Verse 6 tells us, "So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him." Verse 7 adds, "Also he took 600 choice chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt with captains over every one of them." This was Egypt's full military might. They caught up with the Israelites at the Red Sea. Verse 9 says, "So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them camping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-zephon. When the Israelites saw the Egyptian army approaching, they panicked." Verse 10 records, "And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they turned on Moses." Verses 11 and 12 say, "Then they said to Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, Let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness." They were trapped. The Red Sea blocked them on one side, mountains on the others, and Pharaoh's army charging from behind. But Moses stood firm. Verse 13 records his response, "And Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever." Verse 14 adds, "The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." God gave Moses his instructions. Verse 15 says, "And the Lord said to Moses, Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. It was time to move, not pray." Verse 16 continues, "But lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea." God also dealt with the pursuing army. Verse 19 tells us, "And the angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them." The pillar positioned itself between Israel and Egypt. Verse 20 describes the effect. "So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave light by night to the other, so that the one did not come near the other all that night." Then Moses acted. Verse 21 says, "Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided." God used a powerful wind all night long to push the water back and dry the seabed. The result was spectacular. Verse 22 records, "So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The waters stood up like walls on both sides. 2 million people walked through on dry ground. The Egyptians saw the path and pursued." Verse 23 says, "And the Egyptians pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. They followed Israel right into the seabed, but in the morning God fought against them." Verse 24 tells us, "Now it came to pass in the morning watch, that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians." Verse 25 describes what happened. And he took off their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." Then God told Moses to act again. Verse 26 says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, on their chariots, and on their horsemen." Moses obeyed. Verse 27 records, "And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea." Verse 28 confirms the complete destruction. "Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. Egypt's entire army was destroyed, but Israel was safe." Verse 29 says, "But the children of Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left." Verse 30 sums it up. "So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore." The people's response was worship and belief. Verse 31 records, "Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses." After crossing the Red Sea, the Israelites traveled into the wilderness. Chapter 15 verse 22 tells us, "So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. Then they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water." 3 days without water was serious. When they found water at Marah, they couldn't drink it. Verse 23 says, "Now when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter." The people complained. Moses cried out to God, and verse 25 says, "So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. When he cast it into the waters were made sweet. Soon they faced hunger." Chapter 16 verse 3 says, "And the children of Israel said to them, Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." God decided to provide. Verse 4 records, "Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you." That evening, verse 13 tells us, "So it was that quail came up at evening and covered the camp. And in the morning the dew lay all around the camp. When the dew lifted," verse 14 says, "there, on the surface of the wilderness, was a small round substance, as fine as frost on the ground." Verse 15 records, "So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat." Something miraculous happened. Verse 18 says, "So when they measured it by omers, he who gathered much had nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack." Everyone had exactly what they needed. The people called it manna. They also needed water. Chapter 17 verse 1 says, "Then all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sin, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped in Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink." Moses didn't know what to do. Verse 4 tells us, "So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." And God gave instructions. Verse 6 says, "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. The Israelites reached Mount Sinai. Chapter 19, verse 1 tells us, "In the 3rd month after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. Moses went up the mountain." Verse 3 says, "And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain." Verse 4 records God's words, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Verse 5 continues, "Now therefore, If you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people." The people responded. Verse 8 says, "Then all the people answered together and said, 'All that the Lord has spoken we will do.'" God gave instructions to prepare. Verse 10 records, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes.'" On the third day, verse 16 records, "Then it came to pass on the third day, in the morning, that there were thunderings and lightnings, and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled." Verse 18 describes, "Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. Then God spoke." Chapter 20, verse 1 says, "And God spoke all these words, saying," the 10 Commandments followed. Verse 3, "You shall have no other gods before me." Verse 4, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image." Verse 7, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." Verse 8, "Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy." Verse 12, "Honor your father and your mother." Verse 13, "You shall not murder." Verse 14, "You shall not commit adultery." Verse 15, "You shall not steal." Verse 16, "You shall not bear false witness." Verse 17, "You shall not covet." The people were terrified. Verse 19 records, "Then they said to Moses, 'You speak with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die.'" Moses went up Mount Sinai. Chapter 24, verse 18 tells us, "So Moses went into the midst of the cloud and went up into the mountain. And Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. While Moses was gone, something terrible happened." Chapter 32, verse 1 records, "Now when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together to Aaron and said to him, 'Come, make us gods that shall go before us.' Aaron gave in." Verse 4 tells us, "And he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool, and made a molded calf. Then they said, 'This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" God knew what was happening. Verse 7 says, "And the Lord said to Moses, 'Go, get down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves.'" Verse 10 reveals, "Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And I will make of you a great nation." Moses interceded. Verse 11 records, "Then Moses pleaded with the Lord his God and said, 'Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt, with great power and with a mighty hand?' Verse 13 adds, "Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self." Verse 14 tells us, "So the Lord relented from the harm which he said he would do to his people." Moses came down. Verse 19 tells us, "So it was, as soon as he came near the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing." So Moses' anger became hot, and he cast the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. Verse 20 continues, "Then he took the calf which they had made, burned it in the fire, and ground it to powder. And he scattered it on the water and made the children of Israel drink it." Moses took a stand. Verse 26 records, "Then Moses stood in the entrance of the camp and said, 'Whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me.' And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him." Verse 28 tells us, "And about 3,000 men of the people fell that day." God gave Moses instructions for building the tabernacle. Chapter 25, verse 8 explains, "And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them." God gave detailed instructions for every part. He started with the ark. Verse 10 says, "And they shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, 1.5 cubits its width, and 1.5 cubits its height." Verse 22 explains, "And there I will meet with you, and I will speak with you from above the mercy seat." Chapter 31 tells us who would do the work. Verse 3 says, "And I have filled him with the Spirit of God, in wisdom, in understanding, in knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship." The people gave generously. Chapter 35, verse 21 records, "Then everyone came whose heart was stirred, and everyone whose spirit was willing, and they brought the Lord's offering." They gave so much that verse 5 of chapter 36 says, "The people bring much more than enough. Everything was finished." Chapter 39, verse 32 tells us, "Thus all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished." They set it up. Chapter 40, verse 33 says, "So Moses finished the work." Then verse 34 records, "Then the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle." God's presence came down. Verse 38 concludes, "For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel." Throughout all their journeys, God told Moses to send spies into Canaan. Chapter 13, verse 1 says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel." 12 leaders were selected. They explored for 40 days. Verse 23 tells us, "Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and there cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes. They carried it between two of them on a pole. They returned with their report." Verse 27 says, "We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." But verse 28 records, "Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there." Caleb tried to encourage them. Verse 30 says, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." But the other spies disagreed. Verse 31 records, "But the men who had gone up with him said, We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." Chapter 14, verse 1 records, "So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night." Verse 3 shows their fear. "Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword?" God's response was severe. Verse 11 records, "Then the Lord said to Moses, How long will this people reject me?" Moses interceded again. Verse 20 says, "Then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word, but there were consequences." Verses 22 and 23 explain, "They certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it." Verse 34 states, "According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years. The Israelites faced 40 years of wandering. Numbers chapter 16 records a serious rebellion. Korah rose up against Moses. Verse 3 records, "They gathered together against Moses and Aaron, and said to them, You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them." Moses proposed a test involving incense. The next day, God told Moses to separate from the congregation. Moses announced judgment. Verse 30 says, "But if the Lord creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you will understand that these men have rejected the Lord." Verse 31 says, "Now it came to pass, as he finished speaking all these words, that the ground split apart under them." Verse 32 continues, "And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up." Verse 35 adds, "And a fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense." Despite these harsh lessons, the people continued to struggle throughout the 40 years. They complained about water and food. They faced battles. But God remained faithful, providing everything they needed. The 40 years served their purpose. The faithless generation died, and a new generation grew up ready to enter the promised land. As the 40 years ended, new challenges arose. Numbers chapter 21, verse 5 records, "And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread." Verse 6 says, "So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people. And many of the people of Israel died. The people confessed their sin." Verse 7 records, "Therefore the people came to Moses and said, 'We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he take away the serpents from us.'" God's solution was unusual. Verse 8 says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. And it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live.'" Verse 9 tells us, "So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And so it was. If a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived." Another event involved Balaam. The king of Moab hired him to curse Israel. Chapter 22, verse 12, records God's response. "And God said to Balaam, 'You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed.' When Balaam traveled." Verse 28 says, "Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, 'What have I done to you, that you have struck me these 3 times? The donkey spoke. Every time Balaam tried to curse Israel, blessings came out instead. Chapter 23, verse 8 records, "How shall I curse whom God has not cursed?" The time came for Moses to die. He wouldn't enter the promised land because of his sin at Meribah. Numbers chapter 20, verse 12 records, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, 'Because you did not believe me, to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them.'" Moses prepared Joshua. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 7 says, "Then Moses called Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, 'Be strong and of good courage, for you must go with this people to the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them.'" Verse 23 says, "Then he inaugurated Joshua the son of Nun and said, 'Be strong and of good courage, for you shall bring the children of Israel into the land of which I swore to them, and I will be with you.'" Moses went up the mountain. Chapter 34, verse 1 says, "Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is across from Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land." Verse 4 continues, "Then the Lord said to him, 'This is the land of which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have caused you to see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there.'" Verse 5 records, "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord." Verse 7 gives his age. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor his natural vigor diminished. Verse 8 says, "And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Verse 10 says, "But since then there has not arisen in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face." Moses' life was complete. Joshua would finish what Moses had started, leading the people into the promised land. If this journey through Moses' life has impacted you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another biblical story that can strengthen your faith and deepen your understanding of God's word. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about God's faithfulness, his patience with his people, and his power to deliver. Your share might be exactly what someone needs to encounter God's truth today. Thank you for watching. May the God of Moses be your guide, your deliverer, and your faithful companion on your own journey.